Hi, second graders. Welcome back to Social Studies. I have an important announcement actually that has to do with what we're going to be studying for Social Studies today. And that is on Monday, so this coming Monday, we won't be having school. And some of you guys might know why that is, but if you don't, it's because it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And Martin Luther King Jr. is a very important person that we celebrate every year at around the same time, and there's a reason for it. So I want to talk to us about Martin Luther King Jr. You probably know some things about him, but I hope that today you learn something new. So watch the video and then see what we're going to do about what we learned, okay? So just know Monday we don't have school, and the reason is because we're celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. So I'm going to go ahead and read you guys a book that talks about him and why he's important, because some people might know who he is, but they don't really know why. Why do people celebrate him? Why is he an important person? Okay? All right, let me get started. The book is called More Than a Dream. And if you see, this is Martin Luther King Jr. in this picture here, the actual picture of him. So More Than a Dream. A few short decades ago, our country enforced laws that allowed segregation. Segregation is when racial groups are kept apart. This means that that there were separate schools, movie theaters, dining areas, which is where you eat, and even water fountains. When I say different racial groups, what do I mean? I mean the color of our skin, right? So see how it says white, and there's a water fountain, and then there's one that says colored. Colors anyone who's not white. So anyone who has a darker skin than white would go to colored. So there's a water fountain there. So we had laws that said, you know what? You're separated. But I also want you to look at the water fountains. What do you notice about this water fountain and this water fountain? I hope you're noticing that the white people had a much nicer water fountain than they gave people of color. Why is that? There's a reason for it. So let's keep reading. It's unfair, right? It doesn't seem like that should be the case. This is called A Leader Emerges. The civil rights movement was a movement that had the goal of ending segregation. There's this movement, people are saying, we think this is wrong. We should not be separated. We shouldn't have a water fountain for one person and a water fountain for a different type of person. This is not fair. So there was this movement called the Civil Rights Movement, and they wanted to end segregation. They wanted to stop all this. And helping Black people gain equal rights. They wanted Black people to have the same rights as the white people. Notice, remember the water fountain? Which one was nicer? They thought that's not fair. The Black people should have just as nice of a water fountain or a restaurant or an education. They need the same rights, right? Although there were many people involved in this movement, a Baptist reverend named Martin Luther King Jr. Is viewed by many as the leader of the movement. He was an accomplished speaker, leader, and winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. So, what did you hear from that? Martin Luther King, he was a part of this movement, a part of this group of people who wanted to change things and say, enough is enough. This is not okay. We need to change things. Was Martin Luther King the only one fighting for freedom? No, he was not. He was just one person out of many, 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 many people who helped stop segregation. So we celebrate him just because he was one of the big leaders, but he was not the only one. There was many other leaders and many other people, teachers, students, children, lawyers, all kinds of people who helped with this movement. He's just one, and he happens to be one of the most famous that we talk about. All right, protest for change. Let's see what this has to say. Martin Luther King Jr. did not think violent protests would help to change things. He believed in God and wanted to protest peacefully. So he believed that we shouldn't fight each other when we're trying to stand up for things we believe in. He thought we need to do it in a peaceful way, a way that's not hurting other people. Martin Luther King Jr. did not want Black people to have to keep waiting for change. He organized many nonviolent protests. Some people use Dr. King as an example of how to protest. Other people have different ways of protesting for change. So Martin Luther King had one opinion about how to protest, but other people had different opinions. So people did different things for change, to get what they wanted. Okay, let's keep reading. Unfairly jailed, question mark. We'll have to decide, do you think he's unfairly jailed? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was sent to jail 29 times. In 1963, he was arrested in Birmingham, Alabama, for protesting how Black people were being treated. So why did they put him in jail? Did he do something bad? If you read, no. What was he doing? He was protesting. He was saying, this is unfair, the way you are treating us. So they protested. They didn't hurt anyone. They weren't doing anything that was destroying anything. It was called a nonviolent protest, which means nothing, they weren't doing anything violent, right? It was very peaceful. But they still put him in jail. While he was in jail, he wrote a letter to the people that said his actions were unwise and untimely. Behind bars. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote a letter in response to a newspaper to explain why he broke the law. He felt like he shouldn't have been arrested and wrote that an unjust law is no law at all. Unjust means not behaving according to what is morally right and fair. He once said, "The time is always right to do what's right." So, he wrote a letter saying, hey, I know I broke the law, but there's a reason. The law is not fair. It's not fair that we have to have different things than white people. Why is our stuff not as good? Why are we not given the same things? So that's what he's saying. He's like, I broke the law, but it was for a good reason, to do something right, because these laws are not right. Let's keep going. The Montgomery bus boycott. From December 5th, 1955 to December 20th, 1956, so for a whole year, the Montgomery bus boycott took place. So for a whole year, they decided, we're not going to ride the bus. African Americans in Montgomery, Alabama refused to ride the buses because of how they were treated. So in the buses, they would always make them sit in the back of the bus and give up their seat for someone who was white. And they said, we're not doing this anymore. It's not fair. It's not okay. We're not going to ride the bus anymore. They did it for a whole year. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the leaders of this protest. Not the only one, but one of them. It lasted 381 days, and the Supreme Court finally ruled that segregated public buses went against the Constitution. So because they went a whole year without riding on the buses weren't making money. And because the buses weren't making any money, they said, you know what? Fine. We'll change the law. And they did. They said, you know what? We have to start treating you differently. So change happened. A change of heart. Towards the end of his life in 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. began to accept the idea of violent protests. So he said, you know what? I said no violent protests, but maybe I was wrong. He still valued peaceful protests, so he still thought they were important, but now understood that something more must be done against oppressors that were violent and unwilling to change. So he was saying, you know what, if you're not going to listen to us, we keep trying and trying and trying, and you're not listening to us. So he said, you know what, maybe when something is really, really wrong that someone's doing, maybe we might need to think about if it should be violent or not. And that's kind of what he's saying. Maybe he was wrong. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst from freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred." What do you think he meant when he said those words? Who do you think he was speaking to? We're going to kind of move on to this because I want to get to our assignment, but he really does care about loving other people. That was very important to him. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated or killed by a man named James Earl Ray. He was a confirmed racist, which means he believed that white people were better than other people, specifically black people. So he killed Martin Luther King. On April 4th, 1968, he shot Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. while Martin Luther King Jr. was standing on the balcony of his motel room. James Earl Ray was arrested a few months after shooting Martin Luther King Jr. on July 19, 1968. Even though he pled guilty to the murder, he spent the rest of his lifetime in prison, insisting that he did not act alone. Dr. King's family believed him. So this is a picture of the guy who ended up killing him. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a man who fought for the rights of people. He wanted everyone to be treated equally. Many people did not like what he had to say and wanted to silence him. So remember, things were changing because of him and all the people who were with him and were following him and who were leading. And people didn't like that because they liked the way things were. There were white people who said, we like our fountains. We like how things are. We like that we get treated better. And so they were getting angry, and that's why it ended up someone killed him. But it was still right to do that. They were fighting for freedom, right? Many people didn't like what he had to say. Despite that, his legacy carries on as many people are still fighting for justice and racial equality. There's still work to do, my friends. Is there still racism today? Yes. Even though a lot of progress was made because of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., there's still a lot of work to do. America has almost 400-year-old history of discrimination based on race. How can you stop it? So we're going to be talking about how we can stop it as the months go on. But for right now, we're going to focus on Dr. Martin Luther King. Your assignment, my friends, is going to be, let me show you your piece of paper. You should have this piece of paper. If you don't, I'll tell you what to write. So get this piece of paper out where it says debate and discuss, more than just a dream. We're going to read this statement here. It says, anyone that gets arrested must have done something wrong and deserves to go to jail. Based on this story, is that true? That if anyone who's been arrested must have done something wrong and deserves to go to jail? Think about Martin Luther King when he got arrested. Was it because he did something wrong? Does he deserve there? You get to decide. If you agree, yes, everyone who is in jail deserves it. They must have done something wrong. You're going to write in here. If you think, no, I disagree, I do not agree with that, then you're going to write in here. You need to tell me 2 reasons why you agree with this statement or 2 reasons why you disagree. So pick one, agree or disagree. You can X out the one that you don't agree with. So if you agree, write 2 things. If you disagree, you're going to write 2 things, okay? So reasons, tell 2 reasons why you either agree with this statement or disagree. So if you don't have this piece of paper, you're going to get a piece of paper out and write your 2 sentences and then turn it in on Seesaw.